Hello students, this is video 2 in a series of videos designed to prepare you for the interactions unit test coming up. Apparently there is a limit on the amount of time you can use to record, and so in the last video I was automatically cut off. So I was talking about trophic cascades, how we had done the activity, the click and learn, where you were looking at different populations, determining which were the keystone species, those species which largely control the populations in the ecosystem, and then trying to observe the trophic cascade, that is, the effects of removing that particular keystone species. So remember, the trophic cascade is a very powerful interaction. It can control an entire ecosystem, and again, when one of these predators, like the starfish or the sea otter, disappears, it can actually alter the ecosystem itself, the behavior of the organisms, their abundance, or whatever it might be. And then again, the keystone species, not the most abundant species necessarily, but the most important, the one that is doing all of the regulation. And if it was removed, that removal would result in some drastic changes. All right, after that, we read an article on biomagnification. We watched a really annoying video where you had a farmer with a field of crops, and the farmer sprayed pesticide on the crops to prevent insects from feeding on the crops. The insects died, but the toxin remained in the environment, and mice who fed on the crop then took in the toxin. It didn't hurt them, but they accumulated it in their tissues. Then there were weasels who ate mice, and they eat a lot of mice because of that 10% energy transfer, and so they took in all of the pesticide that all of the mice that they ate had taken in through the food that they ate. And then finally you had the hawk, the top-level consumer, who has to eat a lot of weasels, who has to eat a lot of mice, and so what happens is the toxins get magnified in the body of the hawk. And we looked at a particular example of a similar chemical, DDT, and the bald eagle, how that toxin accumulated in the bald eagle and actually interfered with eggshell formation, plunging the bald eagles into the endangered species category. So remember what was happening. They were spraying the pesticide near water to get rid of mosquito larvae, and while it did do that, at the same time it hurt the eagle populations, and they're fine now. But again, it's a great example, a real-life example of biomagnification and the human impact. We then went on to predator-prey relationships, and with this we did our predator-prey simulation with the wolf and the moose species, and we kind of solidified two ideas that for sure predators depend on prey for energy. They must have them or they'll die, and that prey depend on the predator species to control their populations. If something comes in like a disease and wipes out the predators, mark them out, now the prey have no means of regulation on their population size, and so they can actually get out of control, strip the land, that is, of the resources that they might be feeding on, and then start causing trouble in terms of their own population beginning to decline. So that was one of our main things from predator-prey relationships, those two ideas. And then the other was the concept of lag time. Lag time, give me a second. Okay. Lag time describes the period of time between two important events, such as stimulus and response. So on this handout, you were noting that there was a prey increase, and noting the time was at 2 weeks. And then, of course, being a stimulus, more food, the response would be, well, the predators should increase in number. But they cannot increase, in an instant. It does take them some time to increase, and that is the lag time. In this case, when we look at the resulting predator increase, it's at 4 weeks. And so the difference, the lag time between the prey peak and the predator peak is 2 weeks. And this is some very simple species with something like an R-selected reproductive strategy, very rapid reproduction. Likewise, we see the same thing for the predator-prey population from week 6 to 8. The prey peaks at year 6, and the predator responds to that stimulus at week 7. So the lag time, the amount of time it took for the predator to catch up to the increase in prey, was 1 week. And so there definitely will be a lag time problem on your unit test. From there, we went on to the carbon cycle, and it's really, I've harped on it a lot because it's an area where kids have a lot of trouble. So remember what we're talking about. Interactions amongst living systems and with their environment can result in the movement of matter and energy. So yeah, we're talking about moving carbon atoms through an ecosystem, recycling them, but at the same time, we're talking about moving energy through an ecosystem as well. So we named 2 processes that participate in this energy transfer. That's photosynthesis and cell respiration. And so we just start here and say, well, cell respiration gives off carbon in the form of CO2 as a waste product. And coincidentally, photosynthesis needs that carbon source to build glucose, C6H12O6. So glucose is great. It's an energy source, but it can't be used directly. It has to be broken down into ATP. And that's what cell respiration does. And a byproduct of that conversion is carbon dioxide, which is released from cell respiration. So we saw how it's this perfect balance, right? Carbon dioxide into the producers, making glucose. Carbons directly being transferred from primary consumer to higher level consumers. And then, of course, liberated as CO2 through cell respiration. Even plants go through cell respiration. Decomposers, as they're decomposing organisms, breaking down dead organic matter, they're also releasing CO2 to the environment as well. So it's a nice cycle, but then we talked about the human impact of us burning wood, and most especially fossil fuels. Any kind of burning creates excess CO2 in the atmosphere, which plants should be able to handle. There's so many on this earth. However, we are deforesting the rainforests, using slash and burn methodology, cutting it down and then burning it so that the work effort is lessened. And in burning that plant matter, we're releasing more CO2 into the environment. And so we're really just upping the amount of CO2 and diminishing those who could use it. So we're disrupting the carbon cycle. We then talked about global climate change as a result of these 2 activities. Most individuals, most scientists would agree, that there is a global climate change or a global warming trend, and that it is due to human impact. We are causing it. We're exacerbating it or speeding it up. And we looked at evidence. We looked at some graphs, and we saw that global temperatures are increasing because there's a carbon dioxide blanket, and it's increasing around the Earth. These higher temperatures are melting glaciers, so their numbers are down. And sea level is increasing as we've got a lot of melted ice. And so the evidence for climate warming is unequivocal. That is, you cannot debate it. It's happening. We then talked about how that excess 2 is the cause of the temperature rise. And remember, this is not ozone. We're not talking about ozone in this particular unit. We're talking about an unwanted blanket of CO2 holding in heat around the Earth. Remembering that deforestation is the very thing that is exacerbating the problem, besides burning of fossil fuels. We're removing the plants that could actually process all this excess CO2. So once again, we have that carbon dioxide blanket. The sun's rays hit the Earth. That energy is in the form of light energy. And as it hits the Earth, it's converted into heat energy. We talked about why you feel warm while you're in sunlight. That's the energy conversion of light to heat energy. And then with this carbon dioxide blanket surrounding the Earth, that heat cannot escape. And that heat warms the Earth's surface, including things such as the ocean, right? So warmer ocean temperatures result in more storms, and they are of greater severity. And so much CO2 in the atmosphere leads to the absorption of that compound by the seawater, creating a more acidic environment for the organisms that live there, carbonic acid. And so not only does that decrease our biodiversity as organisms die or perhaps become extinct, we're losing habitats such as coral reefs, which is a wonderful place for many organisms to live. In terms of phenology, plants are getting confused. They're flowering at the wrong time of the year because it's too warm in the winter. They think it's spring. And that should be of utmost concern to you since our food chain is based on producers. You know, if we're not able to get the fruits because they flowered in the wrong time of year, then fruit will become more scarce and costs will go up and it will become, a luxury perhaps. So somehow we've got to right this apple cart that was turned over. We then did our gizmo activity, and that was simulating the effects of global climate change on a coral reef. So you increased temperature, which would increase storm severity. With the increased temperature, there's of course the carbon dioxide blanket, that carbon dioxide being absorbed by the ocean and thus changing the pH, lowering the pH of the ocean waters, making it more acidic. And I think in each one of the scenarios you saw the same thing. The ecosystem collapsed, the biodiversity disappeared. And so this is why it's very important that we take care of our Earth. There's a lot of changes, and many of those changes are driven by humans. I'm going to cut this video at this time so I don't get cut off like last time, and in a few minutes I will start the next one. So again, this is the end of video 2 on interactions.